Hello, 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 and welcome to the next episode. We believe this is episode number 7, but who really knows? But thank you so much for being here. And we're going to be talking about communication this week, which is perfectly aligned with the stars because we are in a Mercury Retrograde. This one specifically is in the sign of Scorpio, a water sign, a deep feeling sign. We are also in the sign of Libra right now. So what that all means for us is a lot of communication will be coming up, but specifically in relationships, work relationships, friend relationships, and of course, love partnerships and relationships. I mean, communication really always goes along with relationships, but this is taking that deeper dive and looking into the subconscious. So what we really don't understand or see about our relationships, it would really benefit us to sit with that and have that come up for us.
Yeah.
So
that's a lot. I had no idea it was in Scorpio. I don't know. I don't think I know why, but I didn't know it was in Scorpio, which like I have Scorpio in my chart, and
you should have, because you helped me with my blog post. So,
well, I mean, I didn't think about it in the depth of,
of what that means, takes, right?
Because Mercury retrograde is, to me, it's enough. Like, and even if you're not if you're listening to this and we're out of retrograde, which is November, what? Do you remember 3rd?
November 3rd, which also is very interesting, guys, because that happens to be election day.
Right.
So I just find that interesting that it's all aligning then. And just so that you understand why I'm even saying that Mercury has to do with retrograde or with communication is because Mercury was the planet that rules communication.
Yeah. Correct. Right. And so even if you're not listening to this while we're in retrograde, the idea of whatever we're talking about with communication will still hold true. Like, it's not like people don't communicate outside the month of October to November. It's just heightened now, or you're translated now, or it's miscommunicated more now.
What it is so Mercury appears to be going backwards. So it's not really going backwards, but it appears to be going backwards.
Right.
So when it's Mercury retrograde, think of right? So it's time to realign. It's time to redo. It's time to reevaluate. It's time to slow down, go within. So we've been kind of in that energy with Mars of just pushing forward, getting projects done. Right now is the time to reflect. And a lot of times when Mercury goes in retrograde, we'll see a lot of stuff going on with communication, with our phones, with our computers, which is really funny because I've had this whole Instagram thing going on, which we've been laughing about. We're in this group, and anytime somebody sends a message, there's an automated reply, and we're getting like 40 of them a day.
Oh,
and it literally started on Mercury retrograde, right? So we started a new group, took that person out until they could get the auto reply turned off. Somebody that didn't know that's why we did it, put them back in the group. So this morning, it was our funny, I don't know. It just felt like we were in the middle of a Seinfeld episode to me.
Yeah.
It won't stop replying.
Right. So I feel like if that was going to surmise why communication in retrograde is so important, maybe to speak of, is because it really, if we didn't say it now, or we talked about communication some other time, it would just be normal. But now it's like, this is the constant time of misfire. This is the constant time of where things get tripped up and it's frustrating and you don't understand. And it happens for like a month and sometimes a week before and a week after. So you're like in this 6-week period of everything is just asking you to reflect is basically the story of it all, I guess.
Think before you speak, or Jamie and I were just talking before we pushed record on here about how much, since we're in this new digital age, and I suppose it's not new anymore, but for me being old, it's still, we didn't used to communicate with just text messaging. We used to communicate by actually talking or seeing people out. And I am one that has totally relied on technology to communicate. It's very easy for me. I've gone down that rabbit hole because I'm very shy in person. And so for me, it's very easy to just text, but so much miscommunication happens. And for me, myself, I've realized that, how do I say, it doesn't make me really do the work of actually communicating with somebody and healing or hearing them, feeding off of a reciprocal communication where there's tone of voice, there's even facial expressions, which is one good thing, I guess, about the communication now is we can FaceTime.
Yeah.
But I'll even shy away from that.
Right.
So
my hair's not done.
Well, yeah, right. And then it just plays on that whole perfectionist thing that I'm also dealing with. That's for a whole nother podcast and issue. Right? But for communication, this retrograde for me personally has brought up truly communicating with people, truly hearing people, truly listening to people, truly feeling people, not just reacting or sticking in my head about how I feel about it, but really feeling with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I sat on this when we came up with the topic idea last week. And when I think about communications, because what I do or what I've done for the last good part of my life, I don't know when it started, but I decided that I wanted to create this space of me being a master communicator. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to teach these ideas. So like if you took my teacher training, then my quote unquote goal is not just to tell you how to tell people to step forward and backwards on the mat if you were taking yoga, but when you start to deliver information so specifically about how the feet are positioned and where the arms are positioned, it teaches you to dive deeper into a communication skill. It seems abstract, but you're able to say, well, if somebody doesn't understand me, then I'm able to not just repeat the same thing, hoping that they understand the more times I say it. I'm going to just give you a different way of saying it and hope that you understand because I've now entered your world instead of, you know what I mean? Like my tools are vast and my toolbox is deep. And when you can see somebody's face and you see their eyes roll back behind their head or they go blank behind the eyes and you're like, oh, you probably don't understand what I'm saying. So let me clarify. And what I will complement that with is too many people, when it comes down to communication, they do a lot of nodding and smiling on the receiving end, but don't really stop to ask for clarification, or they fill in the blanks as assumptions with their own assumptions without asking for clarity. And so this turns into like a lot of misfire, a lot of misunderstood stories, a lot of misunderstood people, a lot of like, there's a lot that goes amiss just by not asking a clarifying question. Hey, could you tell me more about that? Or what did you mean when you said the word blah, blah, blah? And then people are so hesitant. I'm in a family of them where my mom used to tell me, I just assumed you would blah, blah, blah. And I would be like, Mom, you can't go on assuming these things.
Right.
Like it creates a whole nother story in your head that isn't necessarily true until you prove it by asking the person that very story. Is this what you meant?
If you guys have not read the book, The Four Agreements yet.
Oh yeah, of course.
Highly recommend it. Super quick, super easy read. I keep it on my nightstand because I constantly need the reminders. And I'm bringing this up because one of the agreements is make no assumptions.
Right.
And I know we're all guilty of this.
Right.
So my daughter does this all the time with me, or like you were saying, she doesn't ask those clarifying questions. For example, I might say, throw this in the wash or take the dogs out, and then she'll come back. You never said that. So what I've had to do is what I do with her, I used to do with the students in my classroom. And I would give them, say, a direction and then have them repeat it back to me so that I know that we're hearing the same thing.
Right.
So what did you hear me say? And you would be shocked at how often on the receiving end hears something totally different than what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've understood that for so long that I've tried to thwart all of these possibilities to where I over ask, I overshare, to where there's no miscommunication at
You
all.
over communicate.
Okay,
I've learned this for my I learned this from teaching through all these years. Yeah. So what happens for me, and if you're a parent listening to this, this is actually a good idea. When my students had to go to timeout, they wouldn't just go to timeout and for a rule of thumb, by the way, it's like a minute per age. So I had like 9 to 12-year-olds, right, in my classroom. So they were in timeout for an average of maybe 10 minutes. They wouldn't just come out of timeout. They had to actually fill out an entire sheet while they were in timeout. What did I do wrong? What will I do next time? How did I feel about it? And I can't remember everything now. It was a great sheet. I wish I had copies of them. But I think that it was very important that you take that time to reflect. And I've brought this now into my personal life, not trying to always teach people, because I don't want to be that teacher that nobody wants to talk to, like she's always trying to reprimand me and teach. But it is good to say, what did you hear me say? And how did you feel about that? How often do we even check in communicating with people, how they even felt about that,
Yeah. That's really great for children, especially because 9 out of 10 times they're not getting it in the home. So if parents are listening to this and they can hear, not that their children need to go into the corner or into timeout or whatever they choose as a pause because of the behavior with a sheet, but just instilling that form of communication so that there is an instilled pause and then you can communicate to me with ease. Another one of Don Miguel Ruiz's suggestions in the 4 agreements is don't take it personally.
Yes.
Right. Oh, I think it's first, actually.
I think it is.
And I think that if that underlines everything, period, everything. Now, I'll tell you a parenting story. I'm not one, but I have them. So I was listening to some communication between my mom and my brother. And there's always been a lot of turmoil or friction. Yeah, a lot of bit of friction between the two of them, my brother's whole life. And doesn't matter why, at least not for this topic of conversation. But the point is that I heard my mom say to my brother on the phone 2 things in the sentence, and he's in his 30s now. This was just a few years ago. And she said, "No, Jeff," that's my brother's name, "and you shouldn't," are the 2 ways she'd start every sentence. And what she's communicating to him in each time she says that is he's not good enough and he's not right. And I can guarantee you 120% that she's been saying those things his entire life with, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, with very good meaning. She doesn't mean to tell him he's wrong in the way that I'm sure my brother is receiving it, and that he's not good enough in that way. But it's her way of being protective. It's her way of whatever. And so I said to her, "Mom, I hear you saying this to him." And she always gets a response back that's so defensive. And I said, "Of course he's being right. Of course he's being defensive because you're telling him he's not good enough and he's wrong all the time." And she doesn't mean it. And she said, "He should just know that I mean well," basically, which maybe, but it's kind of like
there's that making assumptions though.
Right. It's like punching you in the face and saying, "I love you. You should know I love you, but I'm going to punch you in the face." And that might be a little extreme, but like for the better part of 30 years or 35 years, he's been hearing he's not good enough and he's wrong. I said, if you just change those words of that sentence and say what you actually mean, if you actually say, I used the example of, I said, "Mom, if I were to ask you how to get to my brother's house from here, you would tell me the most direct and straight and quick route, correct? Like you would be like, get on 95 and blah, blah, blah," right? And she was like, "Yeah." I said, "You do understand that there is 4,000 other ways to get to his house, and not all of them are by car, and not all of them have to be the fastest or the most direct. Some of them are a scenic route. And until somebody asks you for your opinion, whether or not this is the way or the route that they should go, then in theory, you should just really ask them about their journey tell me about the sunflowers you saw on the side of the road in the least direct way that I thought you should go on, you know? And so anyway, I don't know if that's rectified. I haven't really talked to her about it much. And I try to stay out of nudging her into those consciousness, but it's literally that unconscious that we make these communication errors that cause us. But if you understand that the person that you're speaking to, in this case my brother, is reflecting back defense in such a way that you're not getting, nobody's communicating, it's just defensive speaking, just so that either somebody shuts up or changes the subject, then that language that's unspoken or sometimes very spoken can be rectified, right? Like that's communication itself. I'm not getting the response that I want. I want a loving relationship with my family member. And if my words are demeaning him, there needs to be some sort of like, and to be fair, I don't think Jeff says, Mom, like, why do you keep talking to me like this? Because I think if he pushed it back on her and had an honest, open communication,
and maybe self-advocated. But I think it's interesting because I think that if we really started to self-reflect, how are communications going with people when something feels, I always feel it in my gut. And I know we've talked in other podcasts about how we feel things in our body, but when something's not in flow, stopping and reflecting, because I guarantee on some level, that's how you communicate with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and saying, okay, and then trying it a different way. And for example, your brother, how much does he self-advocate, not just with your mother, but with other people in his life? I would be curious to know, you know, is it because maybe he doesn't want to ruffle feathers with her or whatever? I know that I have had problems with self-advocating. I'm sure many other people listening to this have. And it would be really interesting to see why. Why do you have trouble Why do you have trouble speaking your truth and sticking up for yourself?
Question.
And what are your boundaries? You know, is that okay to talk to you that way? Is it okay to question everything that you do? Using Jeffrey as an example.
Sure.
I'm sure everybody listening could use something from their personal life, but those would be some good questions to reflect upon in this Mercury retrograde with communication.
You know, I was listening to a podcast yesterday that, funny you said that. And at the end of it, the host asks the person that was speaking, every one of them, give me 3 truths to some degree. And so the third truth that this particular person said was, it's okay to make a situation uncomfortable. And I was like, yeah, it's okay. Because sometimes if I speak up for myself, then whatever, I'll tell you, I had a conversation the other day with a girlfriend of mine, and I was putting in perspective a situation that my father and I are actually going through. And there's a couple different things we're going through right now. And he was absent a good portion of my childhood, whether he was in the house and just not available, or my parents divorced and I didn't see him, or I got married pretty young, and I wasn't around him. Like I would say up until I was 38 years old, probably, did we actually start a genuine relationship to actually get to know each other. And so from 0 until 38, my dad has created a picture of me, which I could genuinely say we do for everybody we know, because we don't know everything about anybody. I just met you, when you were 40 or something. And so I had to assume your first whatever half of your life. And now I'm filling in the blanks with you. To understand you as a more well-rounded human, right? So we're pushing up against some things, my dad and I, like old habits, not even habits, old stories that we had bonded together by. And so now bonds are kind of breaking between us that were once old. And I'm still requiring a relationship with my dad, but it needs to be in a way that doesn't hurt either of us. And those original bonds were very hurtful for both of us. It's just that they're common. So anyway, I'm starting to see them, break them, nurture a relationship. It's very interesting. But my girlfriend said to me just that. She was like, oh, it must be so cool to be doing this with your dad and blah, blah, blah. And assuming that he knows me. And I was like, this is how my dad is actually getting to know me, is by me expressing who I am and standing up for myself and breaking these old bonds and putting my foot down, and then requiring that we still love each other.
We also
Precisely.
change too,
Right.
you know,
Right.
so and that's interesting that you bring that up, because not just with your dad, but how many of us make up, well, we all do,
Yeah.
make up and assume stories about everybody in our life, right?
Yeah.
Especially old friends from high school and from the past, because we've developed this whole relationship with them. I'm actually getting ready to go on a girls' trip to Sedona with 3 friends that I've known from high school, but we're, you know, filling in all those blanks. We've also changed so much in between those
Yeah.
times, you know, and are on such different journeys.
What I've experienced lately too with people from the past, or people who like to live in the past because there's some sort of comfort there. And the comfort is that it's known. Like, I knew what happened in the past. I'm just going to drag it forward with me because the unknown is so scary that progress is the enemy, because the future is out there. We don't know what it, I mean, we can create it, but if we take a step forward and we don't know what's underneath our right foot as we step forward, metaphorically, of course, it'd be pretty scary. So people are like hanging on to the past. So when you go sit at a Thanksgiving dinner, and when you go out with friends who you've known since 6th grade, and when you do all these things, the conversation 9 out of 10 times goes back
About
to that, the past. Like, do you remember that time when you did? And I'm like, why don't you learn about me now?
Right.
Like, who I am today, what I've blossomed into, how I live now, you know?
And again, asking those clarifying questions to deepen our understanding, which then brings about deeper connection. And if there's anything that I've learned, just, I would say, in the past almost year, 9 months, but especially it's been coming up for me through COVID, because during that time we were asked to separate.
Yeah.
And as we were separating, it made me realize how important connection actually is, beyond a text message, but to truly feel connected to people. I mean, like, why else are we here? But I don't know how else to connect unless we really ask those questions and listen.
Yeah.
You know, I have, and I know you do too, people in my life that as I'm telling them a story, they're walking around, their eyes are looking around, and they're not listening at all. And that makes you feel very unimportant.
Yeah.
Just, you know, not a good feeling. There's no connection. It makes there be a total lack of connection, causing a disconnect in the relationship.
Yeah. So that goes to this exact conversation, is that I'd say 90% of communication's listening, truly listening, and active listening, even, like, not just nodding and smiling and like that's a hear and that's a with the intent to respond, but instead listen to absorb, and then perhaps
and to learn,
reflect,
to learn. Yeah.
right? And then to acknowledge, to hold space for, to ask clarifying questions, to support. Like, I feel like, if I've said this for a very long time, if people were more others centered, not in the giving away yourself, but focusing on how actions of your own actions affect others, then there wouldn't be as many miscommunications, right? You weren't so, like, they're like, I just said the truth. And I was like, well, would it talk about your truth? Like, how painful was it? And did you actually consider how the other person might receive it? Now, granted, it might have need to be said. Did you do it in the right time? Did you give it in the right dosage? Did you ask permission? Were they like, you know, they say the messenger always gets shot anyway, but it's just as like, your intent was just to clear your chest and your air, but you're also talking to another human being with feelings. And what if it were you? Put yourself, empathy, right? Like, if
just
I heard
as
that,
a society, there's such a lack of empathy in general. A friend of mine was in these classes at Rutgers University, I believe it was, for acting. And he's now teaching the acting classes in New York City. And that's the first thing he teaches his clients, is that it's never about you. you
Yeah.
have to take yourself out of the situation. It's always about the other. And that changes their acting, especially when they have to get on camera and work on camera. They even sometimes they'll take pictures behind the camera so that you're not focused on yourself, but you're focused on the outer, and really connecting with other people. And there we go with the connection again. And I would hope that that would be all of our goal in communicating, is we're communicating for connection.
Yes. I took theater as well. And to speak to that, yes, absolutely 100%. And
Boo-boo's communicating right now.
Correct.
At my door.
Doing a very good job.
Yes.
We learned that as well. And I used to attribute my depth of empathy to that very thing I learned in theater. Like there isn't a movie I don't watch that I don't cry. Happy, sad, comedy, doesn't matter. Like I cry. I invoke emotion, or emotion invokes out of me with such ease, because I'm constantly putting myself in somebody else's shoes. I'm constantly trying to feel life through their eyes and heart, because I can't be everybody. And that's kind of a gift. I don't want to be everybody, and I don't need to do all the experiences, but if I can live a little bit through yours, tell me more about it. So I
was obsessed with that as a child. That was literally my obsession. Every friend I had, I would sit with them, and we would even try to change places to trick our parents. And I would always be like, wonder what it's like to wake up in your bed every morning. I wonder what it's like to have your parents as parents. I wonder what you eat for breakfast I was literally just absolutely obsessed with that thought as a kid. They would be all my journal entries. Well, who would I like to be? Who would I like my mom to be? What would I like my world to look like?
That's amazing.
Always wanting to jump inside somebody else's experience to know what that would be like.
Yeah, that's amazing. How old were you?
Very young, because I still lived in Evansville, and we moved from there when I was 8. So I don't know. I would say between that 5 to 8 year span, it was just kind of my I would literally make my friends and we would change outfits thinking that would trick our parents.
Sure.
And then I
was different.
Right. I would walk to Katrina's house, and then she would walk to my house, and I'd walk in and pretend to be her, because I wanted to know what it would be like to experience her life. But I didn't know how to experience it from her just telling me. I felt like I needed to go and do it. Her parents particularly didn't like the game. My parents were like, yeah, whatever. You can be Laura for a day. Here's your tour list, Then
all of a sudden she's like, yeah, this empathy stuff is not for me.
Right.
I have chores
my parents
when I have empathy.
Right. Do whatever you guys want to do. As long as the list is done, I'm all good.
That's awesome.
Her parents were more like, Laura, go home and knock it off.
You're like, I'm not Laura, I'm Katrina.
Right. Which by the way, she had blonde hair, blue eyes. I had brown hair and green eyes. It was totally, nothing about us was the same, but I really thought it might work.
I like the imagination. I think it's fabulous. Yeah. Do you think empathy can be taught?
Oh, I do. I really do. I think, but I don't know as an adult. I would hope it could. I think that we can keep learning if we're open and willing until we die, like teach an old dog new tricks. I think the older we get, the more resistant we get. I think the younger we get. For example, my daughter is starting volunteering. She's starting to volunteer at Shade Tree once a week. And I think that's going to help her teach empathy, because she's never experienced anything like that. And again, back to my Katrina story, I can tell her stories from all day long of things that I saw when I worked at the Children's Ark in Colorado, and from teaching in lower socioeconomic economies that, I've seen some pretty tough stuff, but I think it'll be really good for her to be engrossed in that environment. For those listening, Shade Tree is a safety shelter for abused women and children. Helps to provide safety and privacy, and helping them to get jobs and just getting back on their feet. And it's just something I've been involved with since I've lived here in Las Vegas. And so I'm excited that I think that will help teach empathy for my daughter.
I agree. And I fully agree with you as far as like the closer you are to child age,
Mhm.
the easier it is to continue to cultivate it. And I also agree that the older we are, the more resistant, because that means that our world has to crack open where we have kept it closed and sheltered because we feel safe. And I feel like the older we get, the more security that we try to establish, whether it's like where we live, how we live, etc. I'll tell you this this amazing story is that I worked with a girlfriend of mine who is a teacher, middle school, and it was a at-risk school, and they instilled a restorative justice program. And the reason why, I mean, basically was there was too many kids going from like their first offense of whether it was a fight or, you know, some offense to like being expelled. It just that they didn't have a middle ground. And so they instilled this restorative justice program to
And
thwart.
tools. They don't have
Yeah,
any tools.
they don't have tools, and they didn't have time and they don't have people. And so like they instilled this restorative justice program to give kids a little bit more understanding and power and a middle ground between being offended and then now expelled, right? Like there was no in between. So I got to sit with her in this one particular circumstance where there were two girls that got into a fight. One girl threw the first punch, was not the winner of the fight, but she threw the first punch because her friend was being taunted by the girl that she hit. Okay. So I never met the girl that she hit until later, but I did sit with the girl that threw the first punch. And I said, and I'm not a great person when it comes to teaching children. I don't have the language or the vernacular for that, but I was listening so I could support my friend in how she teaches children because she's fabulous at it. She does a wonderful job. But I did get to interject a few times. But the most amazing thing that I saw was the first thing that and this will translate to adult humans. So like any
humans.
Yeah, all the humans. But if you can
not just
yourself,
the aliens.
Right. Which I'd love to talk to. But if you're listening to this and you don't have to be a parent to understand the 12-year-old girl's perspective, you can utilize or access the 12-year-old that's inside of you. So we sat down with both of them independently. I just happened to be there with the one who was the original aggressor. And she was the sweetest, most meek, adorable girl that if you probably saw her on the street, you would never, ever assume, you know, how bad assumptions are. So you just wouldn't assume. So, you know, we talked to her, what happened? And she said, I was just having a really bad day. She had a really tough morning or experience with her family. So she just came to school on edge. And this girl was taunting her friend. So she's like, I threw the first punch. And so my girlfriend said to her, would you apologize? And immediately this girl said yes. And so this was the first time me meeting her. And the girl left the room and I said, Sam, that's not appropriate. Like that's not what you should ask this girl to do. So if anybody listening wants to think about their greatest offense up to this point, if you wanted to turn around to the person you offended right now without having any conversation and just say, I'm sorry, it seems like not genuine, that she was trying to appease both of us. And she probably up to this point hadn't said she was sorry for anything in her life, stealing a pencil or any of that.
What you're wanting, right? You're wanting her to first understand what she did, then apologize.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. So my girlfriend was just a little bit quick to jump the gun to ask her to apologize. The second time we met her was the day that they were going to meet each other, because at some point independently, they both agreed to sit in front of each other because it had gotten so big that everybody's friends wanted to kick everybody's friend's ass in this. And so the principal was like, we need to put a stop to this because it's like domino effect at this point.
Yeah.
So they both agreed to sit in front of each other. I happened to be there that day. The girl who was the original aggressor was there first. And we said, do not apologize. This is not what we're asking you to do. What I want you to do is listen. Are you open and willing to listen to the girl's story of how your actions affected her life? And this girl said, yes. I said, that's literally all you have to do is just listen. That's all. And then I said to her, when you listen, something's going to happen. You're going to have a feeling. Okay. So it might make you mad what she's saying. It's fine. Being mad is fine. It might make you sad. That's fine too. But what I want you to do is when you have a feeling that comes up inside of you, I just want you to take a deep breath because all you're required to do is listen. And then I want you to remember the feeling. And after this is all over, when she goes back to class, we can talk. She and I can talk, and then I can give her a tool, because whatever that feeling that comes up is the original feeling she might have had that created an action to punch her in the face, right? Like that's what spawned discomfort enough for her to act on it. Okay, so fast forward, the other girl comes in, they sit down in front of each other. We have them separate. We're in like a little box. Sam and I, my girlfriend and I, are in front of each other, and the two girls are in front of each other, and they're far enough apart. It wasn't even social distance. This is a long time ago. And so we said again, you guys agree to just listen to each other. That's it. And they both said yes. And so we turned to the girl that came in and we said, please tell us what happened after you were hit. And this girl said she had just tried to start cleaning up her life because she was a little more of a scrappy, non-tolerant child. And she said, I just started to clean up my life. I got onto the football team. I had better attendance. I got expelled for 5 days and they kicked me off the football team. So, and now my grades are really suffering. Right. And so I was like, oof. And so I looked over at the other girl, and my friend said to her, do you hear her? And this girl said, yes. She's like, you listened. And everything, she was silent. There was no interruptions. There was no anything. And so she says, is there something that you want to say, or do you feel? And then the girl said yes. And then we asked the first one, is it okay for you to listen to the way that made her feel? And so she said yes. And so like, it's this, even though it's moderated to some degree, we said, okay, go ahead. And she said, out of her mouth, without any hesitation, she said, I am so sorry. Mm-hmm. She said, I did not mean for that to happen to you. She said, I had a bad day. I just didn't like the way you were talking to my friend. Then the other girl says, it's okay. It's not completely your fault. And then started to take ownership of hers, right? I look over at my girlfriend and we're both
that gave me goosebumps.
Right. Oh, girl, you should have been there. We both leaned back in our chairs. We're like batting back tears because had no idea that this was going to unfold this way. But they got heard. They were seen. Oh, it was the most gorgeous communication ever. If you just take the time.
An unfacilitated, yes. I'm sorry.
Yes.
A heartfelt.
Yes.
I'm
we said
sorry.
You did not have to do that. We said it. You don't have to do it. Just listen.
But and because what a great example. Of
it was beautiful.
How powerful listening is. And as you were sharing this story, which I believe I've heard before in the past, because it's such a powerful story to share. So I encourage you guys to really absorb that. Is what kept coming to my mind is how similar that was to meditation. And how both are so difficult, right? We say simply just sit down for 5 minutes and meditate. Simply just listen to the person talking to you. But to be an active meditator, to be an active listener, it requires a different part of you to open up.
Yeah.
And to actually feel that other person, actually be receptive to what they're saying, whether you're meditating and it's your higher self or spirit or God, whatever, or to the person sitting in front of you, but to actually take that time and just listen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I'll tell you the end of this. So we let the girl who confessed all of her woes to go first, just in case there was a little. So at the end we said, okay, that was amazing and beautiful, and you guys are courageous and brave, and it took a lot to get to that. Like, that's huge. I don't even know adults that are able to do this, is what we told the girls, right?
No.
And so we said, listen, we know that there's friends on both of the sides that want to beat each other up too because of this. What can you tell us that you'll do now? And the one girl who got hit first, she said, oh, it's cool. I'm going to squash it. Like, she's like, it's no big deal. It's nothing. So she, like, with advocacy said, I'm going to tell my friends to stand down and to move on and go about their life. Like, this isn't, and I was like, this is amazing. So that girl leaves.
Amazing.
I said to the one that stayed over, who had to originally listen, and I said, so did you have a feeling that came up? And she leans in and she says, have you ever had emotion for no reason? And I said, so emotion doesn't happen for no reason. And for all of you listening, emotion means energy, energy in motion. And so something happens to where this energy stuck inside of you and it rises up. It wants to be seen. And that's the motion. It wants to move out. And I said, all you have to do, you moved it out before through throwing a punch, which is semi-primal. And just doesn't go well, right? Like there's consequences for that. I said, an easier way to move it out is through breath. I said, so do it with me. I mean, this is a 12-year-old girl. And I said, close your eyes, take a deep inhale and open your mouth and exhale, let it all go. And this girl's body just melted. Like all of that tension that was coming up to be seen left with the very breath. So we did it twice. Her eyes were beautifully like wide-eyed and bright. And I said, how do you feel? She says, I feel so much better. And I thought, well, here it is. Like it's a breath or two.
It's a breath. And we say this, I think, on every podcast, but even in my own life, I feel that I'm recognizing how important even just that one breath is. And once I take the action step for the one breath, normally a few more follow.
Sure thing.
So if you could just take that time and stand back and take that one breath. I did some active breathing last night when I did a bath for self-love. I put in some Epsom salt and some rose quartz and clear quartz, placed my hand on my lower belly and on my heart because I was so overwhelmed. I have so much going on this week. And I felt tension in my neck starting. I had a headache and I was like, I have to take this as a sign. Like I have to step back, breathe, and like totally decompress. And I got out of the bath and felt 100 times better, had some energy to make dinner just by taking that time to breathe. I really want to show you guys a couple crystals that I recommend. There's 3 for communication. I'll grab one. Well, I'm trying to look to see if I have them in front of me and I don't. I might have to go grab them.
Okay.
So one of them, though, is the Labradorite, which I've recommended before to you guys, but I'm telling you, this sucker is powerful. The reason I recommend this is because Jamie and I were kind of talking about, well, we were talking about communication, but getting in touch with what's going on a subconscious level. You know, like by talking things out with you, the girls realized what was going on in the trigger because of the stresses that happened earlier.
Right.
She realized that emotions don't just come up for no reason at all. Right. There's always a deeper level. And that's what I love about Labradorite is it helps us to connect with our subconscious. It helps us to connect with our deeper level and to communicate from that space. The other one is Aquamarine, which I've also showed you guys before. That's the stone of courage. That's been a really pivotal stone for me in my growth because I've lacked a lot of courage in speaking my truth. I personally happen to be a Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So I get very caught up in my mind and my thinking mind and then I'll come up with a million stories for whatever it is that will be easier for me to not step into my courage. And Aquamarine is the stone of courage. It's about stepping into your courage, communicating your truth, but in a way that can be heard. It's not just about like coming in and yelling, because that's what so many of my clients say. They're like, oh, I have no trouble communicating at all. I'm like,
right.
Are you listening? Because there's that active listening part, which is also communication. And then my last one is Amazonite. And I'm kind of looking. Oh, well, then that just works out perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you
I
don't
love
just have it on. You have on a triple wrap
of
some wrist armor of some Amazonite. So the reason I love Amazonite so much is it connects our heart and our throat. So it's about speaking our truth, but from our heart center. And I just think that's really beautiful and very much lacking right now. I just see so much communication and it's more, I mean, my gosh, we could even just use our politics as an example right now. You know, there's no communication happening. There's no listening happening. And it's literally painful to watch and to listen to. My stomach tightens, my heart feels closed off, and I can't even hardly watch it. And I'm sure no matter what side you're sitting on, it's just painful and uncomfortable because that is the prime example of what communication is not. So I feel as though they need to put on their They're Amazonite.
I think you should send some.
I think I should send some Amazonite to the
Courtesy
White
of.
House. And yes.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I really feel that it's a very soft and gentle stone. And I feel that it helps to, especially when communicating hard things, think about your partner or your husband, and you're going to have a really difficult conversation with them. And you know that there's going to be a disagreement. Taking those breaths, grabbing some of your wrist armor, and also being prepared with how are you going to respond before you even go into that difficult conversation. Thinking about how you're going to respond. There's something that you and I both touched on in this conversation today that I thought was important with my students. Okay, take your bathing suit off. With my students, though, when they would sit in timeout, they would come up with an action step. What are you going to do next time? How are we going to handle this next time so that we don't end up in timeout, so we don't have this consequence? And Jamie did this with the girl as well. How can you handle this now moving forward, and talking to the friends and listening to the people? So I think it's part of communication, really, to have effective communication during difficult times, is to pause, take that breath, and come up with your action step, because more than likely there might feel like some of this. And rather than just shutting down or walking away or having that knee-jerk reaction, which may even cause a bigger problem down the road, walking into the conversation with some plan, some type of plan, how you're going to act. Even if it's just that you have to, an intention, great.
Yeah.
Right. Even if it's just, okay, we have to table the conversation. I feel us escalating. So we're going to table and come back.
Yeah. I was thinking that for action steps, just in general, this is not going to be, I listened to Jamie and Laura, and now I'm going to walk away to somebody I've never communicated, or I'm going to walk towards somebody I've never communicated well with, and then execute something perfectly. Like this is probably the most challenging trial and error, because you're dealing with another person that has a consciousness and a way of communicating themselves. And it's challenging and it'll be difficult. I would say that if it's something you want to practice, that you start off with a not the most difficult conversation or topic you could possibly come up with, but probably one that, something lighter, something that could just cultivate skills. So that way you can dive a little deeper the next time, and perhaps a little deeper. And then maybe in a month or two from now, you can start talking about the depths of what it is that needs to be talked about in a very loving and communicative way. I read a study once that said people on public transportation, buses and trains, etc., know more about us than our closest family members do. And it's simply because we assume people should know these things about us. And when we meet somebody brand new, we absolutely know that they don't. So we inform a brand new person about little intricate things about us that we think that our families should know, which just that assumptions in telling stuff and telling stories turns into being like a thorn in the side later, is because why don't they get to know those deep, intricate parts of you or your story as you would tell a stranger? So I think that if we take that into consideration too, is stop assuming that people know you and start telling people about you, informing about you the way you want yourself to be known, instead of them having to fill in the blanks or being full of blanks, not even filled in, like there's just a lot of missing parts in communication. And it's, again, you got to deal with people, and it's got to be trial and error, and it's got to be with good intention, not like I'm just going to tell them.
Oh boy, I have a family member that does that, and she's even proud of it afterwards. Yeah. Well, I just told them. Oh, but that's so interesting you bring that up, because I didn't realize there was actually a study about that.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a whole TED talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's kind of like an assumed thing that people will say, that we're more comfortable talking to strangers because they're never going to see us again. So we might sit and just tell them even more than our therapists, because we're never going to see them again. We're on this bus ride or a plane ride. I've got 2 hours and you're getting ready to hear all the shit.
Right.
Right. And take with it what you will, because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But that's, there's a whole study. I need to watch that TED Talk. Well, I think today's topic will be one that we should touch on a little bit more.
I agree. I feel like anybody listening to this, yes, I think you were going there. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I would say, I feel like because there's so many facets to communication, that anybody listening to this, if it's something like specific, I know you and I had talked about a Q&A, a live Q&A with people who are listening at some point, maybe within the next upcoming weeks. But like, if this is interesting to you, or the last one was interesting to you, and you want to know a little bit more, or something more specific, because you and I, until we start telling our own personal stories, it's pretty vague, right? Like, how do we implement this in our own lives? Like, how do I communicate or understand, or whatever, insert whatever of that here? Ask us. And I think, we could certainly curtail a discussion around it.
Yeah, we would absolutely love to hear from you. What topics would you love for us to cover? But yeah, the Q&A as well, and choosing some people. I think we talked about going live in my group, right?
I think so, yeah.
And doing that, which is Crystal Healing with Laura. Yeah, that's the name of the group. So we would love to have you over there and to communicate with us. Yeah. So thank you again for listening to podcast on communication. Number, we're not sure, but let us know. Keep us in check.
I think let's play a game. Let's say, guess which podcast number this is.
Yes, and you will win a piece of Amazonite, because we all need some.
So good. Well, that was fun. Thanks for communicating with me.
You're welcome. Thanks for communicating with me.
We'll talk soon.